you're saying this, that, and the other. You're going by they, them. My pronouns are intelligent/handsome.
Yeah.
So if you don't refer to me as intelligent/handsome, I'm going to call HR, and you're making work not a safe space for me.
Yeah.
Now, as we talked about last week, since I'm a certain color and since I'm a male and heterosexual to an extent, I'm not allowed to say certain things.
To an extent.
I'm not allowed to say that, right? So that's my whole point.
That's
So
morally, hey, it's a moral question. We're gonna have to.
Hey, we'll address it. We'll address it, right, to a degree.
I would love to, but I'm gonna refrain simply because we would get so deep in the weeds, and we should, like I said, I'm happy to just move forward on the agreement that we had, but
Okay.
with the little asterisk here that like technically we don't agree on this.
Dogs, cats, monkeys, etc., are to me as valuable as brother, sister, daughter, friend, etc. And that's something I almost can't explain with logic or reason. That's more of at first that's a feeling, and then I say, okay, well, let me double click on that and think why, right?
But I just think he went wrong. And if you want to truthfully look at the way his life ended, if you want to find out whether his philosophy leads to a happy life, I'm not even going to talk about it because I just want you to look it up yourself, whoever's watching. But
like, is there an answer to the question? Does 1 + 1 = 2, right? And some people say no, there's not. This is like kind of I know I'm dumbing down, and I'm kind of strawmanning postmodernism here, but that is in my mind what it is, right?
It is hard to strawman. Like, I think you're doing a perfect job. It's hard. It's so absurd that it's actually impossible to misrepresent because everything fits into postmodernism. That's why it's anti-truth. Anything you want to say fits in.
All right, guys. Today, thank you for checking out the video. We're jumping straight into morality today. Big overview, big topic, big questions that are correlated with this. So we're going to kind of go over a lot of things here. We're going to go over the origins of what it is. What are the necessities of morality? Why do they matter to you? What are some common misconceptions? Like, how can you integrate morality in your life, and when should you integrate it in your life? So, I mean, just going to go straight into it right now immediately. We're just going to cover the origins of morality. Where do they come from a biological perspective, philosophical perspective, spiritual, religious perspective? Like, just straight into the content. We're going to just dive right into it. So, kicking it over to you, as I love to do already. Where does your version of where does morality come from in your mind?
Sure. So I'll give you my answer, but I'll start off with more of a broad answer. That way we can have some good context here. So there's obviously multiple perspectives. You just kind of highlighted just now the biological perspective. So there's something called evolutionary psychology, and it's basically a study of organisms and history through the lens of assuming that there is something to our psychology that evolves alongside of our physical bodies. And this basically leads us to certain behaviors that are more adaptive than other ones. So an example might be, I'm good at throwing a ball because my ancestors may have needed to be able to throw balls or throw like sticks or whatever at animals that they're hunting. So now I have this urge in me to throw balls, right? Something that's a very simple example, but something like that. And I mean, I have my issues with that, but I think in a certain level that's inarguable. But
Right.
I don't think it's a full picture of it. But so there's that. Then you have the philosophical perspective. So plenty of, this is one of the biggest questions in the history of humankind. So plenty of philosophers have taken this on throughout history. Aristotle and Plato are big ones. Kant's, which I know you are familiar with, so I'll let you speak more on him. And then there's something called like utilitarianism, which is, you may be familiar with like the trolley problem, where you've got one guy on a track and then a switcher, and then on the other track there's like 4 people, and the train is headed towards the 4 people. And the moral question is it right, is it morally correct for you to switch it to only kill 1 person instead of 4? Right, and this is a utilitarian perspective. So basically that focuses on trying to do the most amount of good and almost like trying to quantify what good is and maximizing it through that lens. So that'd be utilitarianism. Right. And then of course postmodernism, which we are going to dig deeper into. So I'm not going to say too much about that right now. Now before I let you take over, I just want to say, obviously my perspective, I am a Christian. So I believe in what would be referred to as a divine command. So I believe that morality is basically built into the structure of the universe. It is an objective fact of reality that there is good and evil, and that was put there by God. So I believe it is our responsibility to use our reason, which is also a gift from God, to figure out what good and evil is, and live our lives according to that. And I believe there are also certain moral truths that were revealed to us through the Bible, through Jesus, etc.
Right.
So that anyway, I just want to make that clear. That's my perspective, but I'm not going to talk just about that. I just want to make sure that that's
Sure.
obvious.
And let me ask you some quick questions here to kind of maybe ask some housekeeping questions. With the divine command, and I think the answer, I know the answer to this, but for the viewers and for kind of for you and for the viewers, does that does that is that mutually exclusive with, in other words, does that still allow what you just mentioned, biological perspective, insofar as can it coincide with some of the biological perspectives of it, as well as some of the other aspects of it too? Like there are certain things that are definitely, butting heads with that theory, but
Yeah.
can that be true as well as, you're like you said a little bit earlier, you're kind of built in with some biological urges, right? And that could
Yeah.
be framed in some divine command way.
Yeah, that's a good question, and thanks for asking that because that's something I'm glad to clarify. Uh, I believe that the divine command theory, if we want to call it a theory, basically encompasses everything else, right? So that's kind of a
Right.
common theme with the Christian worldview is that, and part of the reason that I am a Christian is I believe it explains everything that there is to explain. So I believe that the divine command encompasses the biological theory. It also encompasses any of the philosophical investigations.
Right.
And if anything, those are like two sides of that coin. So the biological evolutionary psychology explanations would be like the things that we can't deny. Like we're all sort of appalled by the idea of murder.
Right.
And you can't, in my view, the clearest explanation for that is that it's just objectively wrong. But then there's the philosophical investigations in it, which can kind of get, and if anything, I think the philosophical investigations are more, I'd say less reliable because we're
Sure.
using our human intellect. And I think as we
Sure.
get into this conversation a little more, I'll try to demonstrate how these types of investigations sort of lead you down paths that you don't really need to go down, that ultimately don't make any sense. They become incoherent, but they seem
Right.
coherent as we're doing it. So anyway, that's not the best
Okay.
explanation, but
And
we'll get
no, I
into it
no,
more
that's a very
later.
good.
So
No,
I'll
that's
leave it
perfect.
there.
That's a really good explanation, and that's really a top level. The reason I'm asking is because there are, for those of you out there who have already turned off the video because we already introduced the God pill, and then in my mind, I want you out there to think, hey, there is an explanation from God, from the divine command area, that does not discredit or does not disqualify my own personal beliefs on maybe the biological aspect of it or maybe the philosophical aspect of it, because you can have one and two both be true at the same time. And I'm gonna back up a little bit and kind of bring something else into the conversation. That's for as an analogy. When those of us say, "Hey, I believe in evolution, therefore I don't believe in God," right? Some of us said that in high school, this, and that, and the other, and then you become enlightened and say, okay, maybe I do believe in God, and maybe He kind of is the reason why evolution is the thing. Maybe that's compatible. So what I'm trying to say is, like, this is not decoupled, right? There are certain things that can just mesh together, and it's really about you, the viewer, to kind of do your own spiritual slash introspective investigation on what you kind of view morality is, and this is what we're going to help you out with today. We're going to try to overlap a lot of different ideas and kind of bring them together in a way that's digestible for everyone. And I think that's really important to start out. That's why I asked those questions out the gate. And coming from my perspective, because you mentioned out the gate that you're coming from this from a divine command perspective, and for me, I lack that divine command kind of meant like a manuscript, if you will. I'm more into, in my mind right now, what I would say I'm more leaning towards that kind of categorical imperative style, kind of that style, where it doesn't discredit the divine command but for me it's like I don't have that in me just quite yet. So we're still on that spiritual journey on my end. So with that all being said and everything's quote unquote on the table, I do want to kind of just ask the question, I guess, that has to be asked, elephant in the room. What does it mean to be good? And I just kick that over to you so we can agree on a definition of what it is to be good. And then
Yeah.
we'll kind of therefore go, if we can't agree on that, then it's just going to be the 2 hours of us talking about knowledge and stuff. And I'm fine with that because that's definitely interesting stuff. But
Yeah.
let's just start off with that, I think.
All right. Well, yeah. So we'll do our best here to find some agreement. I, I guess let's think about this. What does it mean to be good in the Christian worldview? Given that there is a divine command, it means living in accordance to God's will and not your own. Okay. So another part of the Christian worldview everybody probably is familiar with is the idea of ancestral sin, or basically this idea that at the beginning, God created the world perfectly for us, and then through our own free will, and I can already hear the screeching of the atheists. Why would he give us free will? And then we, just because we're going to do wrong, he should have known that. That's a theological debate. We don't have to go there. But anyway, free will basically
Happy to go there if you want to, but yeah.
No, we should not go there, because that's a whole nother debate.
That's next week. We'll get into that next week.
That's a whole other debate, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, through free will, we basically introduce sin into the world. And since the original sin, ancestral sin that caused us this world to become what it is, basically corrupted, and it introduced death into the world. So it's a long-winded way of saying that if we don't align ourselves with the divine will, then we are always going to go wrong, right? So the difficulty in being a Christian is to sometimes discern what is your will versus what is God's will. And in my view, it actually usually works out, it always works out in God's favor. It's his will is divine, it's supreme, he is God, so he's going to win. But you don't always know until it happens, like until something breaks, whether or not you're actually on the right path. So, it's a struggle. But so anyway, the question you asked me was, what does it mean to be good? Very short answer is, it means to follow God, to ignore your own will and submit yourself to the Almighty.
Okay. So that, for me, we're not going to be able to go farther with that, because that's, if that's good. Okay. So here's how do I say this with being respectful, but also moving forward a little bit. For me, that definition is sufficient if you presuppose that God is real, and then, or not real, but God is good. God is all knowing, all loving, and everything. Again, like you said, we'll get into that maybe next week, because that's way out of scope for this, but also in scope, because everything's everything all at once.
Yeah.
But it's I can agree to, I understand. Okay, so let me ask it this way, and or I can give you my kind of version of what good is. But can two people look at something and agree that something is good or bad when person A is an atheist and person B is a Orthodox Christian?
Yes.
Okay, so we have that going, so we can move that forward that way.
Yeah.
So if I look at you and say murder is bad, and you agree with me, does it matter if I'm saying it's bad because of my preferences, and you're saying it's bad because God said so, but also I've reasoned that it's bad, or can we both agree that the outcome is it's bad? More.
Yeah. In the narrow case there, I'm happy to just say we agree on if it's good or bad, and then like the question is, does it matter? Maybe that's a different question. But are we agreeing on, is it good or bad? That is possible. Yes.
Because I don't want to dismiss the God part of the good definition immediately, right? Because in my mind, that's coming back into the equation when you ask the question, why should I care, right? Because some people don't, or I guess to triple click on that real quick, if you have no motivation to do good things, maybe there is a room for God in your heart, and there is a kind of religious aspect needed, right?
Yes.
Because otherwise, and it's kind of funny, I love the fact that we're already sidelined here, but in some way, but as a details kind of bottom up guy, it might be driving you crazy here, but I'm trying to get into the quadruple clicks of, should you be necessity, like what is actually driving you to do good things? And that's what we'll get into a little bit later, but
yeah,
let's agree right now on a small thing here, or you can ask me if you want, but I'm going to agree to put a pin in the what is good question, because I think it's hard for me to disagree with what you said, because if I presuppose that God is real, God is all knowing, all good, then therefore it logically follows that God is good, and therefore that everything that would be said, what is good, you have to say, does God say to do it, right? So that's kind of where I'm at, right? But that's a presupposition that I'm okay to take for the next, 15 minutes or go from there. But from my perspective as somebody who, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I'm happy to move forward with what you just laid out, but I do think you should still explain what you think good is, just because I think that's valuable. So I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. No, and again, that's why, and you're getting to the crux of your argument, really, is really ask me the basic question that is almost, and again, this is kind of the cart before the horse, is like, what is really answerable, right? And so, for me, I'm going to appeal to well-being today. I think that's probably the easiest thing to do, is just appeal to well-being, and then we can go into that question of what is well-being, right? Like, and then
Yeah.
it's a house of cards that gets broken down easily when you ask the question, why is that good? But if I just say good is relative to well-being and the aggregate well-being of society, and we'll go from there. I'll be happy for you to do an internal critique on that.
I don't I can't. I would love to, but I'm gonna refrain simply because we would get so deep in the weeds, and we should, like I said, I'm happy to just move forward on the agreement that we had, but
Okay.
with the little asterisk here that like technically we don't agree on this, but we're
Okay.
just
So
moving
what I'm going to
forward.
say, what I will say here to make this more fluid is that
Yeah.
99% of the things that you think are good, I think are good.
Yeah.
And I would say
Yeah, that's
99%
fine.
of things that you think are bad, I think are bad as well, right?
Right. Yeah,
So
and that's an important distinction there, right? Because as you were asking me, like, is it possible for two, like an atheist and a Christian, to agree on what's good or bad? Of course, like in narrow cases, yes, and in fact, the vast majority of cases, we're going to easily agree this is good, this is bad. The disagreement, the little asterisk that I put there, is like the foundation of what is good and bad, and then we would get into like extremes of like me
right,
trying to break your worldview and then you coming
right.
up with ways to fix it, and then we go back and forth like that
And then
forever.
an hour later, we're talking about a sink and versus a
Yeah,
toilet versus a urinal,
yeah,
and I get that.
exactly, dude.
And
Yeah,
that's great, and that's what we do and that's what
yeah,
we do in the boardroom and
yeah,
stuff. But
yeah,
just to kind of say, yeah, so we agreed 99% of what there's a huge overlap on what we think is good or bad, and I'd love to hear something later on in the episode that you think is good and I think is bad, but
yeah,
let's get into that later. But it's okay. So let's for now put a pin in that, and yeah, with the asterisk of that. And I do want to say, let's jump into, because you mentioned biological perspective, and I know you talked about that and the evolutionary psychology aspect of it.
yeah,
And the red pill, again, they get it right in some aspects. So this is where the red pill gets the description correct. There is a lot of stuff in my mind from a biological perspective that's built into the kit of the evolutionary psych
yeah,
aspect, but some folks kind of appeal to that too much in my mind without they use that as a way to explain away everything.
yeah,
And it's not, sometimes it actually is not really a way to explain everything, right? So it's something where I think, okay, people do things because of that. Does it make it good? It makes it good if you change the definition of good from what you and I both just said to something like maybe what John would say if he's watching the propagation of DNA. That is an evolutionary psychology answer, right? Like
yeah.
that's something that anything that would make me evolve is good is a very slippery slope, right? So it's that's already what I'm thinking immediately when we jumped into the biological perspective. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what you think about that, but
Yeah, I think the biological perspective is has its strengths. I think, as I said in the first thing I was saying is, I think it's more robust than even the philosophical arguments, because it's evidence based. So there's empirical observations we can make about human behavior, and we can draw conclusions from that. Whereas with philosophy, generally you're starting with some observation, but you can really twist it and warp it and ignore factors, and it's when you come to biology, it's much easier to see like the correct aspect ratio, if you will. You know what I mean?
I like that.
Yeah, I think the evolutionary psychology, and evolutionary psychology is also very helpful in conversations, debates, arguments with like feminists, or I was just going to say women, but let's just say feminists, right? In arguments with feminists, it can be very useful because, again, it's based on just bare observations of human behavior, right? So
Right.
if men seem to behave or enjoy certain activities and women seem to enjoy certain other activities, it's very easy to draw conclusions on why that would be the case. And it's also very useful to underscore, like, hey, it's not just that we do these things, it's that we should continue to do them. It's actually moral to follow our biological instincts in many cases, right? Now, not every case, which is where this theory breaks down, right? You do have to ignore some of your biological impulses for the greater
Right.
good. And that's where I said that the evolutionary psychology and any biological, purely biological explanation is going to fall short because of that.
No, and I like there's an is-ought distinction there, and basically that is what is a fact and what should you be doing, right?
Right.
And that really is, to go back to the top of the episode. I kind of wish I just said this. What is morality? Morality is what you should do. What does that mean? Define should. Okay, John, we'll get into it.
Yeah.
But it's like there are a lot of facts about the way you act, right? And that could be just based on evpsych, if you will. And I think that it's very, very like when I ask myself, should I do something? A lot of the times it is a question of ethics and morality, but sometimes for me it's a question of, well, more of a game theory question, right? And it that ties in a lot to evolutionist psychology because I always ask, okay, if somebody asks me, hey, do you want to buy this thing? Let's say, I'll think, well, hang on a minute, do I need that? And then I'll always think back to what happened. Like, what about cavemen? Did they use these things? Like, did they need these things? That's one of the things I use to like stop myself from purchasing stuff that I don't need.
Yeah.
So that's a weird way to think of it, but there's a lot of evolutionary psychology that kind of drives kind of why you think certain things. And you're right to say that you don't want to follow all these impulses, but you can acknowledge that they exist for a reason, right? So it's one thing to suppress the impulses and deny the impulses and do all that, but
Yeah.
you need to acknowledge them and then show your true strength by not succumbing to them, if you will.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's kind of where I would say, and I agree with you on that. So that's really where I'm at with the evpsych aspect of it. But
Yeah, I agree.
what about anything else on the biological aspect?
I mean, there's a note here. Just I can briefly mention. Basically, part of what I mean by you can observe behaviors is that you don't even have to leave it to just human beings. Like you can observe that primates, like chimpanzees or even gorillas, will exhibit certain behaviors that we would consider moral, like sharing, right, or conflict resolution. So
Yeah.
these sorts of behaviors can be witnessed in other species, which I would take as from my worldview. I would take that as further evidence that like right and wrong is simply built into this world. It's not. Yeah, it's it's in the fabric of the universe is what I would say about that. And that, to me, that's evidence that lends credence to that point.
Right. And so when you say that this is a perfect way to talk. I mean, right here is the veganism question comes into play here. Does another animal, the non-human animal, are they on the same level, morally speaking, as humans, right? And that's the ultimate question for that camp, right? So it's kind of like, for me personally, I'm going to answer that with a simple no. And my situation is that I don't believe that, dogs, cats, monkeys, etc., are, to me, as valuable as brother, sister, daughter, friend, etc.
Yeah.
And that's something I almost can't explain with logic or reason. That's more of at first that's a feeling, and then I say, okay, well, let me double click on that and think why, right? And that might be part of the biological aspect of, hey, this is part of my tribe. These are a speciest argument because it's part of my species. I want to, maintain that species. Like, I'm not too concerned about like the other, this, that, and the other. But what I won't do is I won't go into materialist claims and say, well, actually, when I say, well, actually, you're thinking, well, actually, the dog actually has like a 2.6 units of consciousness, and we have 116 units of consciousness, and therefore this, that, and the other, we deserve way more better treatment. I'm not going to go into that, right? Because that to me is not something that's where they get that wrong. That's not a measurable thing. So I guess over to you. Quick word on veganism and speciesism in general. Like, you got anything on that, or?
Sure. Yeah. So my point of view would be the answer to that question is also no. I don't think animals are as valuable as human beings. That is because God gave us dominion over the world and the animal kingdom. And to expound on that further, the relationship with morality, or the good in Christianity, is a personal relation. So it is you and God, right? That is the only two things that matter to you as an individual, is you and God. And what would God want you to do is act with love and kindness. So the fact of the matter is, you are in His image. You are His child, right? The animals, we actually named them, so they're below us, right? And this is how the Bible plays it out. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that we can just do anything we want with them. It doesn't mean we can treat them any way we want. Why not? Because that is not in the spirit of love and kindness, right? So if it's right for me to eat a cow, it's right for me to do that. If I'm hungry and if I need to eat, the cow is within my dominion. It's right for me to eat it, just like a plant, right? However, it's not right for me to torture the cow and make it feel bad and make it feel pain just for no reason whatsoever, because that's not in the spirit of love and kindness, right? Feeding myself is in the spirit of love and kindness. torture or cruelty is not. So obviously, I think it's fine to eat cows, but we need to treat them well. And animals, pets, etc. It's
Right.
up to us to treat them kindly as much as possible and not cause them needless suffering. So that's where I'd land on that.
So for me, I'm hesitant to even grant that because that could lead to a world where, hey, now we've got biologically lab created meat. Why aren't you eating that? You just said needless suffering. Like, why aren't you eating the biologically lab created meat that George Soros tells you to eat? So it's kind of like the Klaus Schwab tells you to eat, etc. So for me, I won't even grant that because I'm not grounded in divine command. So that's one downside of that is I have to be logically consistent. So from my view, yeah, to be logically consistent about this, I actually have to say there's nothing wrong with torturing an animal. It sounds weird to say, but that's there's no way for me to explain why it's wrong, right?
Yeah.
To kind of ask you, like, to
Yeah.
ask myself that question: why would it be
Yeah.
wrong if I'm not grounded in any divine command, right? If
Yeah.
I'm just saying that speciesism is the case, what is wrong with torturing an animal, right?
Yeah.
And other than it feels bad, other than if you do that in front of other humans and they know you do that, you could have negative game theory consequences in your life. In a vacuum, in a hypothetical room where you just go in there and torture an animal, nobody knows about it, is that wrong? So I can't in good faith say yes, but logically speaking, I can't say no either. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I'm not sure what to say about that. I mean, I'll answer this. I'll say this because you brought up like why would it be wrong to eat meat? Well, I'll just answer it again from my perspective. It's simply because that is a human creation versus God's creation. God created the world in this way. There's no reason for us to alter it like that, and it's still not needless. Just because I could have a salad, right? Because you can make that argument too. Like, okay, you don't have to eat meat to survive. You can eat non-meat to survive, right? So so it's always needless? No, that's not the case. Killing an animal is within my dominion. It's not a matter of. I said needless suffering. That doesn't mean needless death, right? Like it's within
Sure.
my dominion to kill this cow and eat it, no matter what. Whether I need to or not, it's within my dominion. What's the onus on me is to not cause it to suffer and feel pain and be cruel to it, right? Now there may be some pain in the aspect of killing it, right? I wouldn't consider that needless in this case. So that's how I would answer that.
Well, we'll agree on that, and I'll dismiss my psychopathy with respect to the animal thing, and we'll get that later. But that you're going to see a theme here, right? Like since I'm not grounded in divine command, I do have to kind of yield. I do have to appeal to emotions or appeal to feelings, right? For me, and that's totally fine in my mind. Like, dude, if you're going to appeal to feelings, admit that that's the case and move on, or double click on it later and introspect. Because for me, it's better to say this is an emotional opinion and I know that, but here it is, than just say, you know what, this is a fact and it's based on logic and reason when it's really an emotional thing and you can't actually explain it. So
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. Is there any part? We're gonna get into the philosophical kind of perspectives here, but before we just do one more last thing, is there any part in your life or any part where you've had a interfacing with other humans where they bring up an emotional argument and try to masquerade it as a logical fact? And how do you handle that gracefully?
Yeah, that's a great one. I feel like we'll definitely get more in depth on that in a bit here, but I would say that my rule of thumb with any kind of moral disagreement is to, well, I'll put it this way. Maybe this sounds arrogant, and I'm sorry if it does, but if somebody disagrees with me in terms of like they're not a Christian, my assumption is that their worldview is not coherent. Give me some charitability and understand that that's because I believe in God, who is the ultimate truth. So if you don't believe in the ultimate truth, then it's necessary that I believe that you don't have a fully coherent worldview, right? So again, sorry if that sounds arrogant, but that's just a function of my Christian beliefs. So if basically what I would hear when I would hear somebody disagree with me on something like this, I would automatically know it's emotional. I would know without even hearing what they're going to say that it's emotional. So I don't have to contend with that. At least this is what's going on in my head. I'm happy to just listen to what they say. And now, depending on the context, maybe I choose to argue with them, and maybe I don't. But that's where I'm thinking of it. Is like,
Sure.
I know it's emotional right off the bat. I don't have to investigate
Well, that's
it.
a good point, and
Yeah.
we'll as Gavin Newsom says, we'll stress test that later.
Yeah.
And we will, and I'm looking forward to it. But let's go ahead and talk about the philosophical kind of underpinnings of. I guess
Right.
there's certain philosophical kind of explanations of what morality is, right? So
Yeah.
people grew up and people have been thinking about this for a long time. We're not the first people to just think about this ever.
Yeah.
And
Imagine
it's
if we were, man, that'd be a great episode.
the low hanging fruit that we'd be picking right now would be
Yeah,
insane, right?
dude.
That'd be awesome.
Just two
But
dudes. Yeah.
I definitely did sit down and think about this. Like, just at some point in my life, I thought about this and thought,
Yeah.
yeah, what is it? Because I always hear, hey, this is good, this is bad, and this is the other. And I always say, well, why is it? What's going on with that? Like, how did you come to that conclusion? And usually it was, at first it was, hey, my friend's dad is a pastor, and he says that you can't do this and that and whatever. And I said, well, I don't think they're, whatever that, insert rebuttal to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it turned into, well, what's best for my life from a, maybe a utilitarianism perspective. And yeah, I'm happy to overlay what that is, but you mentioned it earlier at the top of the episode. It's basically the trolley problem. And so utilitarianism is kind of just consequentialism, and that's another word for it. And it's basically maximizing, like, it's hedonistic, maximizing happiness, minimizing suffering.
Right.
What is the best outcome based from your life? And then therefore that's morality, right? So that's got its problems, but I would say if you're going to pick one of the big five, if you will, that's not the worst one to pick.
Yeah.
Although it could lead to the worst one. So I think just that's what I would say for utilitarianism, and we'll go into that. But anything about virtue ethics or utilitarianism that you want to get into or not?
So I'll say that Plato and Aristotle, so the virtue ethics, are very, very compatible with the Christian worldview. So they're almost, it's almost like a one-to-one in many respects, right? They don't have the foundation because they didn't go all the way back to the beginning. But one of the most famous Catholic saints, his name is Saint Thomas Aquinas, is known for having basically taken, and he's open about it. It's not like he plagiarized it, but he openly talks about Aristotle and his ethics and how well they map onto the Christian worldview, and he basically uses that as a foundation to sort of lay out his system of ethics. And St. Thomas Aquinas in the Catholic Church is one of the most venerated saints, and certainly in terms of like the intellectual side. So just to point that out, that virtue ethics and that original form of morality, or maybe the oldest form that we have, is very, very, very close to the Christian worldview.
Right.
I wanted to ask you about Kant. You're probably going to get that in that next, but I remember you had a little phase many years ago where we were sort of investigating this question as well before I was a Christian. But I remember you were reading a lot of Kant. So tell me about the categorical imperative, because I don't know much about that.
Yeah, and I first learned about this in when I was 22, 21 years old in a community college class, and I had like a philosophy teacher who, he's exactly like you expect. Just imagine your typical college philosophy teacher. Mm-hmm. He was that guy with like 40 bumper stickers, that kind of style. And yeah, he's explaining this to me, and I did like my own research on it. But yeah, the categorical imperative is something that I guess his name is Immanuel Kant. He's a philosophical kind of thinker back in the day. Mm-hmm. He created this framework for what he views morality is, and it's that the one sentence of it is that if everybody did X, would society still function, right? Mm-hmm. So if you think about it from that perspective, he's trying to make morality objective by tying it to the way society functions. So the way he talks about it, and I'll give an example. I guess one of the best examples you can talk to you about is stealing. Stealing is bad, right?
Yeah.
Well, why? Right? Well, why is it bad? And the way Kant explains it is that if you allow stealing to occur in your society, then everyone is going to be afraid that their things are going to be stolen from them, and therefore it'll create too much chaos in society, and therefore you must outlaw it so that society could function properly, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And there's holes in that argument because there obviously are holes in that argument. But yeah. For me, when I first heard that, I thought, okay, that is a very, very good way to make everything make sense. And I started thinking about all of the big 5, big 10 moral questions, and it really does. It really is, I think, the second best in my mind of like the big 5 political perspectives, or sorry, philosophical perspectives, because it really explains kind of everything almost from my perspective. It almost explains everything. Yeah. And so where I go with this is that if you can find something that person A would say is immoral, but you as person B would say, let's apply the categorical imperative to this. If we allow it in society, does society turn into chaos, or does it function better? then you're into that realm of, do I disagree on what better means? So yeah, you have that perspective. There's a subjective aspect of it, right?
Yeah.
Because you're baking into that question, you're baking into that definition a level of subjectivity by saying, does society function? But to me, that's not subjective. That is what I would consider to be an objective thing, because two people
Yeah.
can look at something and agree on whether or not it's functioning, but their opinion of it does not matter. It is functioning or it isn't functioning. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's kick it over to you. Like,
Well, that reminds me of just one thought on that. It reminds me of so in the church as well. There's another saint, Augustine, and he's also one of the early. They call them the church fathers. So these are the people who lived in maybe just a few centuries right after Jesus, and basically these are the people that we look to as the guys who basically taught us how to be Christians, because it's obviously, the Bible, for as great as it is, did not really leave us an instruction manual in terms of like how to worship, how to apply these ethics to your life and stuff like that. And you could think about that your entire life and not get to the bottom of it. So there's a number of writers that are considered to be church fathers, and Augustine is one of the most famous ones. And he wrote a work called City of God, and it's basically he's talking about the fall of the Roman Empire. So he lived just after that happened, and many people, when Rome fell, blamed Christians. They thought Christianity was the reason that Rome was destroyed, and ultimately. Now, Augustine obviously disagreed, being a Christian, so he wrote a book trying to explain his perspective. And in the City of God, he basically explains a lot of what you just said. He basically says that he breaks down the priorities and the ethics that Rome lived by, and he simply points out that these were always going to lead to failure. Now, in his perspective, he's saying that this is because they did not follow God. So the city of God versus the city of man. So the city of man is how he says Rome was a city of man, and every city is a city of man. And just like every construction of man, it's going to rise and it's going to fall. And I think if we applied like the categorical imperative, we could look at a number of things that Rome did, or even maybe that we're doing right now, or any society throughout history is doing, and see that there are certain moral choices that we make that do not line up with the categorical imperative. They do not line up with the city of God, and that's what ultimately leads to failure. So maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit to get into like why morality is so important, but I thought I would add that in there because I think that's
and it's a good point. And I think that actually reminds me of something I said at the top of the episode. God, divine command this is actually a perfect example of one. Divine command does not discredit or disqualify this categorical imperative from being true.
Right.
In fact, they both can be, one of them can be the other one, if that makes any sense, right?
Yeah.
Like from a Christian viewpoint, it could be that the categorical imperative was given by God, if you will, right?
Right.
Like in some way that Kant may or may not have been spitting, if you will, you know what I mean?
Right.
So it's kind of like I think that for those of you out there who haven't had, maybe have no spiritual background, check out this categorical imperative, apply it to what you think is good and bad in your life, and go from there. I think start as a good starting point.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. All of this, in my view, is at least somewhat compatible. So I pointed to like Plato and Aristotle as being like an almost one-to-one, and this categorical imperative. If I knew more about it, I could maybe give you like a ratio there, but I'm sure that there's a ton of overlap, and there's a lot of overlap with utilitarianism as well. Honestly, I mean, it's not completely useless. Now, maybe the next one, if you don't have anything to say about that, you can. But the next one we're going to talk about is Nietzsche, and that's where things start to get hairy, right? So,
right.
Yeah, I'll let you.
And I'll let you go into that because well, you go ahead and get into it actually because I think
I can. Yeah. All right. So Nietzsche is a writer that's often misunderstood. So I'm going to try to represent him accurately. I'm not an expert in Nietzsche. I mean, I've read. I'm going to sound like a complete idiot because I'm going to say I've read it and then I forgot the name. But his most important book, the book where he talks about nihilism, it's The Will to Power. Is that what it's called? That's what it's about. I hope that's what it's called.
I think it's. I'll get you the name.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll keep talking while you do that. So in this book, he basically he outlines this idea that Christian ethics, as he sees them, are akin to what he calls a slave morality. Okay, so what he sees is that Christianity makes you passive, and this is in Nietzsche's words. Christianity makes you accept the suffering in your life and actually not do anything about it. So he sees Christianity as a tool of control, at least to the Christianity that he understands as a tool of control. that keeps people from fighting back against injustices. And so now he sets that up that way, and then he does propose a solution. And his solution is to live by what he calls the will to power. So he sees power as the supreme ethic in the universe. If you have your ability to assert your will, that is the highest good that you can achieve. So whatever you decide your will is, you need to be able to enforce it. And that's what, but the thing that comes first is having the power to do it, right? Now, right. The question, of course, that this begs is, what will are you enforcing? So let's say you get the power, what are you going to do with it, right? And that's where this phrase that you've probably heard of is called nihilism comes from. So nihilism is a natural conclusion to this argument, which is basically there is no right or wrong. Whatever is right or wrong is whoever has the power to say what's right or wrong. And that's obviously going to change throughout history. It's going to change from minute to minute. So now Nietzsche had a more optimistic view. He wasn't simply, nihilism is kind of depressing in my view, but Nietzsche saw it as almost optimistic. He says like, hey, look at how great and free and actually open everything is. You can decide whatever you want to be right or wrong and follow that. And so that's an overview of Nietzsche and nihilism. And I think we can see how these previous thinkers we're talking about come very close to Christianity. This one basically completely snaps it in half, right? Like it's completely, we're going down a crazy rabbit hole. So what are your thoughts on that?
No, and I think that there's a lot to be said about how, in some ways, this guy, you may think, okay, and by the way, yeah, that is the book, Will to Power.
Okay, good.
He has another book called Will to Nothingness, but I don't know if I've never read that.
With that one.
It's in some way it brings into question, does might equal right in some way, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because there has to be some way to enforce any of this stuff, and so no, for me, I think that mentality is not even worth dipping into. I think if you're going to do a little deep dive, just ignore that one for now. Get into that later when you're a little bit farther in your morality journey. But for me, like that should be observed as something that's kind of like a fictional book. It's like something that's for fun, like just to see what is that actually, right?
Because
I don't think there's zero value in it, but I would say there's not that much value in it from my perspective because it can't lead to any. It has a low percentage chance of leading you to a better life. And that's kind of where I'm coming from, like utilitarianism / categorical imperative for me is a lot more, okay, this could lead to me having a better life, right? So it's like, why would you jump into the niche thing? It's like, in my mind, it's like that as you said, the nihilism aspect of it is just too dark. And I'm like, okay,
well, I'm
anti-nihilism and anti-natalism, if you will. So it's like, or anti-natalism.
I will say one thing, because I want to be fair to Nietzsche. I would say it's worth reading. And it's because the overview that I just gave is not a complete overview. So the whole book is not just about nihilism. He actually begins with some really good criticisms of not just Christianity, but let's say like progressive ideology, right? Yeah. In that book, he actually predicts communism, like 80 years before the Soviet Union, not that 50 years before the Soviet Union. He actually predicts communism and says that it's going to be evil. And he also, the famous phrase that he also utters in the book is, we've killed God and there's no amount of water that's going to wash our hands, right? Something along those lines. So he's writing at a time where he's already seen the death of what we call God in society. So he it's not like we can credit Nietzsche with the death of the spiritual morality that people of the days of yore enjoyed. It was already gone by the time Nietzsche was writing. So he's really diagnosing why that happened, and that's where his criticisms of Christianity come from. So it's I just want to be fair to him because it is he's a great writer. He's a fantastic writer, and he's really a genius. He's a very smart man, but I just think he went wrong. And if you want to truthfully look at the way his life ended, if you want to find out whether his philosophy leads to a happy life, I'm not even going to talk about it because I just want you to look it up yourself, whoever's watching. But yeah, that's just to say, he's not worth really following to that degree, but he is worth reading just to see how he thinks,
Okay. No, and I like that disclaimer because he definitely has some good works and check it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, it's that's too much of a might equals right potential, and maybe it's too much of a black pill, which for me, I tend to avoid those because that could be true maybe, but not worth looking into because it doesn't benefit you, right? So it's like I'm skeptic on that. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely. Yeah, I would call it an info hazard, right? It's one of those
yeah,
things
that's a good
like
one.
you're not supposed to know this kind of stuff or think about it on this level, right? But that maybe sounds anti-intellectual, but anyway, that's how I feel about it. Yeah,
No, that's a good point. It's a good
yeah,
point.
yeah.
But I think that's a good segue into the hard problem of consciousness, but that's mapped onto morality,
Okay.
if you will. You
I
know,
was like,
the
yeah, let's
iterated
do
hard
that
problem.
one. Yeah,
No,
yeah,
this is the iterated hard problem of morality, which is postmodernism. So,
yes,
for me, you got moral objectivity, right? And that is where I just asked you, hey, can 100% of people agree? Okay, I just asked you if two people. Can two people agree that this is good or bad, regardless of their foundational beliefs? Yes, they can. But what about 100% of people in a room? Yes, they can if you scale the room down. But when you ask the question, is morality subjective? I mean, that's a question people ask, right?
yeah, yeah.
So let's, before describing postmodernism, let me ask you, if morality was subjective, is it morality, or is it useful to even just call it morality or talk about it?
In short, no, it's not. It's
Okay.
not real.
Yeah.
If it's not objective,
Yeah.
it's not real.
Okay. So that being said, we have postmodernism, and I'll give a kind of a brief what I think about at least the moral relativism aspect of it. But I'd like you to kind of give a top down, because I'm, again, this is two details up for me.
Sure.
But for relativism, it's like people kind of make the argument that, okay, maybe for Dean, it's morally acceptable to do this, that, and the other. But for me personally, it's actually not morally acceptable to do that, and it's more like acceptable to do this and the other thing, where he disagrees with that. And that's and this person from a postmodern perspective believes that those are both compatible. So
Right.
to me, I've got already a bunch of red flags in my head that I would love to get into, but I kind of want to hear you overlay a little bit more on what postmodernism and kind of relativism is.
Sure. So Nietzsche wrote Will to Power in the late 19th century, I want to say like 1870s or so. And as I said, already at that time we had suffered from, and I say suffered advisedly, we already suffered from the Enlightenment and the sort of death of God and spirituality. And as I said, Nietzsche in the book predicts communism. He doesn't call it communism, but he predicts basically that because we lack a a universally agreed upon foundation for our moral principles, this will give rise to certain groups of people who exercise their will to power with so-called good intentions, right? That people will come along and say, hey, we can throw away all that crap about God and about right and wrong and good and evil. We know that that's all nonsense. Here's what's actually good, right? And in the case of communism, it's you should stop working your life away. You deserve to get paid exactly the same amount as everybody else in the company because everybody's contributing to the value of the goods we're outputting. And this leads to, well, hell on earth, right? Which is what communism really was. So now that relates to postmodernism because that's the extreme end of nihilism, is at least to postmodernism. So as a term, postmodernism is a bit cloudy, but the way I understand it, the most helpful way I understand it, is as the death of narratives. Okay, so postmodernists believe that there is no objective truth to anything. Everything in history that you think you know, every perspective and especially every moral question, is simply a matter of who wrote the story, right? So it's just a story, and there is no overarching true story. It's just whatever story whoever invented comes up with. So there's certain narratives, and by pointing this out, they give themselves the freedom to invent new narratives and new stories. So now we get to the point, let's, extreme end, go all the way to today. Everybody has their own story, right? Everybody's their unique snowflake. Everybody, whatever I say I am is what I am, right? And you have to, and that's the truth. It's just as true as whatever you would say, right? So it ultimately leads to the death of truth, right? Postmodernism, I have this in my notes, is the cause of all the world's problems, right? Everything that you think is wrong with this world is because we live in a postmodernist world where truth doesn't exist. There is no such thing as objective truth anymore. It's simply
Right.
whatever you think, and therefore it becomes reality, right? So that's how I'll describe postmodernism. And I think so. Nietzsche sort of snapped Christianity. Postmodernism has like buried it under the ground and is like shoveling dirt over it, right? Like it's all gone. It's completely the opposite of Christianity. In fact, in my view, it is purely satanic. It is evil. this is an evil ideology. So we started good and now we're in evil. I like how that worked out. We didn't plan that, but that's kind of how
No, we didn't. But
yeah.
but for me, postmodernism is like tightly coupled with Marxism and neoliberalism, and you can get that from Jordan Peterson when he does his little rants. Postmodern, neo-Marxist, liberal, neoliberal, communist values, and more relativism and skepticism, and all about.
Right.
So when he rants about that, there is like a good reason why he couples those together, right? So
Yeah.
for me, is there anything to be gained from that aspect? Yeah, there's one or two things that you can pick up and say, okay, that's interesting insight. But to me, when you start going down that route of okay, nothing is true, right? So you have to disagree on what's true. Okay, so if you can't agree to somebody with this basic understanding that there is a truth, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's start with that.
Right.
Is there something that's true? Like, is logic, or we're going to presuppose logic. So,
Right.
like, is there an answer to the question? Does one plus one equals two? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And some people say no, there's not. This is a kind of I know I'm dumbing down, and I am like I'm kind of strawmanning postmodernism here, but that is in my mind
No,
what it is, right?
it is hard to strawman. Like, I think you're doing a perfect job. It's hard. It's so absurd that it's actually impossible to misrepresent because everything fits into postmodernism. That's why it's anti-truth. Anything you want to say fits in. Anything. That's why it's crazy.
Right, and specifically, and again, check this part out on Rumble if you want to get more on this. But specifically, when you have people like in today's society, like right now, when you have people saying, "Hey, instead of calling this guy a blank, call him a MAP," right? So we're saying minor attracted person, right? So that's that's dangerous for kids, right? That's dangerous for kids, and that's when you start to get to the put. And again, from a game theory perspective, we can talk about politics. The liberal kind of side of things, they're getting away. They want to back away from this now because they know it's like such a hot topic. They know, okay, right. I think we went a little bit too far because of how many votes Trump was able to receive based on just the fact that people got out of their chairs and said, wait a minute, Kamala's for they, them, and Trump is for you. I'm getting out of my chair and voting. So it's like you get into that equation. It's like that is a postmodernism thing, right? The whole they, them, this, that, and the other.
Absolutely.
And that'd be hilarious if your pronoun was they, them, this, that, comma the other. That would be actually really funny.
My pronouns are this, that, and the other, dude. Oh man.
No, I mean, and this is the way I like to debunk postmodernism. To whenever I ask somebody, hey, what is true? Can we agree on that? And they say, well, my lived experience is my own version of truth, and maybe for you have your own version. I always jump into, well, hang on a minute. You're saying this, that, and the other. You're going by they, them. My pronouns are intelligent/handsome.
Yeah.
So if you don't refer to me as intelligent/handsome, I'm going to call HR, and you're making work not a safe space for me.
Yeah.
Now, as we talked about last week, since I'm a certain color and since I'm a male and heterosexual to an extent, I'm not allowed to say certain things.
To an extent.
I'm not allowed to say that, right? So that's my whole point.
That's
So
morally. Hey, it's a moral question. We're gonna have to.
Hey, we'll address it, right, to a degree. So it's. But my point, I'm trying to be silly with this because it is silly, right? You have to match the energy of what's going on. Postmodernism is silly, so you got to say, hey, let's combat that with their own worldview. Okay, so I'm intelligent and handsome. You got to call me that, or else. There's got to be another bathroom for intelligent and handsome people. And if you come in, it's not up to me to tell you you're intelligent or handsome. It's not an IQ / a beauty contest. It's more of I identify as intelligent because, whatever. You see where I'm going with this? It's so ridiculous that.
Well,
I'd like to hear your thoughts on it.
I see it in me. I think you're being charitable because you can't even you can't, but you're afraid to say the truth, right? Which is like. What's more absurd than saying a woman can become a man or vice versa? What's more absurd than that? It's a complete destruction of the physical world and logic, right? I mean, it doesn't get more ridiculous than that. And of course, and you compare that to something like, okay, this guy's a wolf. He thinks he's a wolf. Why is that more ridiculous than he thinks a man thinks he's a woman? Why is that? It's not more ridiculous. It's the same thing. Right. It's in the same arena. So it's impossible to straw man. Which makes it fun to argue against, right? Because you cannot misrepresent it. So this is ridiculous no matter what.
And you bring up a really good point because we say ridiculous, like when you say I'm a wolf, I'm a man, I'm a woman. Yeah. It's ridiculous, but it's also it speaks to the character of like the way that I view morality and the way that I view reality and the way that Dean views it. When somebody comes up to me and says, "Hey, I want to cut my genitals off," and I'm 15 years old. my reaction to them is a lot better than the postmodern reaction. The postmodern reaction is, hey, yeah, go do that, man. Get it. You're totally right.
Yeah.
But Dean and I are concerned and say, hey, let's get you. In the same way that if a 16-year-old kid came up to me and said, I feel like I'm too fat, and they're, let's say they're 6% body fat. It's the same exact thing in my mind. Those are two of the same problems. It's, hey,
Yes.
you have the wrong image of your body. Like, let's get you some help, right? Let's help you out and understand, like, hey, you need help in a good way to like reverse that issue, not reverse the gender, but reverse the thought, right? So
yes,
that's why I laugh at these people, because they are ridiculous and they actually are leading to negative outcomes. And in my mind, I want to solve the problem, and they have to admit that it's a problem to solve it, right?
Yeah.
They're not saying it's a problem. They're saying embrace whatever. Embrace today you wake up and you're whatever, this, that, or the other, right? So that's where I'm going with this. And that's why we may sound like, we're being like not thoughtful, but in the other day, our viewpoint on this is way more empathetic and way more compassionate and way more caring about the well-being, as I would put it, and Dean would agree, to the individual, right? So and the aggregate society. So it's kind of like there really is no argument against our version of against postmodernism. And I would really put 8% of my net worth, that's a number I just came up with, on if somebody could convince me postmodernism is correct. I'd go 8% of my net worth. I'm happy to give that to you if you could convince me. So, with that,
I could spit on that real quick. I got some. So, as you were saying, I think that if you come at this from the lens of just sort of like a normie liberal, or even maybe just like a normie conservative, you might hear what we're saying and think, oh, you're harsh, you're mean. Like I may even agree with you, but the way you're saying it is mean. Okay. As I said a minute ago, postmodernism is the root of all the evil in this world. It is an evil, satanic ideology, and I'll try to illustrate why. Tony just did it, but I'm going to try to expand on it a little bit. If you had somebody come to you and tell you something that is just not in accord with reality, right? Let's make it very simple. They come to you and they say, "Hey, the sky is red." Okay, you look up, it's blue. It's blue that day, right? On most days, and you look up and you say, "No, it's actually blue." And they say, "No, it's red." Your response to them would not be, "Okay, it's red." It wouldn't be that. It would be, something might be wrong with your eyes, right? Like, let's get you to an eye doctor. Let's because it's not red. It's never been red. There's no reason, like physical reason, that it could be red. It's impossible. So let me get you to a doctor. Let's have your eyeballs checked, and we'll get that fixed, so that way you can kind of live a normal life and see colors the way they're supposed to be, right? That is a kind reaction. It is an empathetic reaction. It's a helpful thing to do. I'm pointing out that you are not really seeing the truth of the world. And from that, I'm deducing that something is wrong with you, right? Like something internally has gone awry, and I want to help you fix it, okay? So if a 15-year-old comes to me and says they want to cut off their genitals, I'm not going to react by like calling them slurs and insulting them, and like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say, okay, I'll hear you out. Like, where is this coming from, right? Let's just try to dig into it. What makes you feel that way? And I think in 99 cases out of 100, it's going to be something like, my body's grown in these weird ways, and I feel insecure, and I feel like girls don't like me or boys don't like me, and it's going to be some normal teenage concern, right? Stuff we all went through when we were kids. And if you listen to that little child, 15-year-old child, come to you and have this natural concern, but they come up with like a crazy solution, like cutting off their genitals, and you hear them out and you say, "Yeah, let's go get your genitals cut off. It'll make you feel better. No problem." You're evil. That's an evil thing to do, right? The kind thing to do is to listen to them and help them understand that although they may be insecure, this is the way the world is. They were born into the body that they were meant to be born in. God made them exactly how they were meant to be made. And they need to learn to make peace with it. And they will. And give it a few years, they're going to forget about, what I was insecure about when I was 13. I could tell you one thing, I had really bad acne. I remember that very well. But all the other stuff, I don't remember. There was probably a ton of stuff that I wish I could have changed about myself. Now, as a man at 32 years old, I'm perfectly happy with myself, right? I have confidence.
Right.
And I'm very glad I didn't do anything totally drastic just to fix those insecurities way back then. So I just want to lay that out.
That's a very good point you bring up, because I like the way you do the red versus blue with the sky. That is a very good example, right? You can't agree on almost anything at all if you can't agree on what is truth, right? Not only, it's not like they disagree, that like I disagree with you on what things are true sometimes, but I don't disagree with you on what is truth, right? That's just a ridiculous thing to. I mean, it's not ridiculous, but that's just that's in the weeds too much to where now we can't even go anywhere, right?
Right.
But
Right.
if you say to me, oh, Jim said this thing, and I say, no, I don't think he said that, that's a disagreement on what is true. But we both agree that we know that that's verifiable, right? We know that
Yeah.
that's could be, well, not even verifiable. We know that there is a truth claim on there, right? So there
Right.
is kind of the thing I always bring up, and there is an answer to the question, how many mosquitoes are in Florida right now? We just don't know the answer. But that
Right.
doesn't mean that you and I will deny there is an answer, right? So
Right.
you have to presuppose that you can have an answer to questions to actually answer them correctly. And I feel like there's some way. I was trying to get through this without invoking, and I'm not going to invoke it. I'll just say this: if you have somebody telling you that postmodernism is good and this that, question their intention. Like, why are they saying that to you?
Mm-hmm.
And who are they in general? Like, who they tend to be in your life? Are they good faith actors? Are they people who want you to start thinking about something else rather than the Federal Reserve, rather than the national debt, rather than this that? You see what I'm saying? Where I'm going with this?
Right.
So if you're
Absolutely.
arguing
Yeah.
with your neighbor about some biological man fighting somebody at the Olympics, like if that's what you're doing, and that's fine. You could be upset about that. But the king looks over the castle and he says, "Oh, great! You're not questioning why we took gold off this as the standard for the United States dollar. They're not questioning that. They're not questioning the endless wars we're funding. They're questioning the genitalia of who's boxing and this, that, and the other.
Yep.
And again, that's an issue, but it's nothing compared to the things we've talked about before, politically speaking. That's actually the real reason why your
Yeah.
life may be bad, if you will. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that is an hour-long overview of what morality kind of came from. So, I mean, I like that we did cover that. So,
Yeah, we got-
it's kind of like where do you want to go from here? Is kind of where I'm going.
Yeah, I think that was great. I think we can sort of jump into more practical conversations now. So, the next thing we had on here was the necessity of a moral compass, and I think that's we can certainly bite into that. So, I have a question that I'll ask you, and this one we have written down, so I'll let you spit on it a little bit. What happens when people don't consciously define their moral principles? What happens when they're just floating through life, doing whatever they feel is best, and never really digging into it or questioning it? I'll let you go from there.
Yeah, no. So if you're somebody who's never questioned morality, you don't exist in my mind, because that's in my. Unfortunately, I actually believe that everyone has questioned morality in some way, but not in a way. They maybe not in the way that like a deep dive, right? So when you are, I think it's baked into your biology. I think that on some level, when you're 5-6 years old, the first time you do something wrong and you feel like a little bit of a guilt, right? Mm-hmm. The first time you do something wrong to another person, like I remember distinctly when I was 6 years old, 7 years old, I kind of bullied some kid once for the first time ever at a water fountain, and I immediately felt this weird. I immediately felt like this. Oh, something was wrong about that. Mm-hmm. I'm 6 years old, so nobody told me, and I never thought. Oh, I never sat there and thought, well, per Kant and per Nietzsche, I should probably not push this kid into the water fountain, right? But I didn't think that at 6 years old. I couldn't. So my point is, it's kind of not an answer to your question. It's more of it's a little clever kind of non-answer, but I'm not answering it with, I don't believe that nobody's ever thought about that. But if you don't double click on it in some way, you do it could lead to, in my mind, the postmodern style where you say, hey, I don't actually have to think about if something's good or bad. I'm just going to think about my urges, right? And if you just succumb to all your urges, you're going to be not free. And by not free, I mean you're not free from your urges, right? So that could be the corn hub aspect, that could be the video game aspect, that could be anything. If you're just succumbing to all those urges without thinking, hey, is this actually morally okay? And by morally okay, I don't mean is it morally okay to God. I'm saying it from a material perspective. Is it morally okay from my worldview? The answer is always no, but you don't think about it. You just say it's my urge. I'm just jumping right into it, and it doesn't hurt anybody, quote unquote. But it secretly is hurting me over time. So that's my answer there. So
yeah,
I'll go back to you on that.
I think that was a good answer. And honestly, it's funny you mentioned like bullying a kid for the first time was your introduction, because I honestly have the same story, which is hilarious because we didn't talk about that. I don't know if we've ever talked about that, but we've known each other for like 15 years. That's never come up, but we have the same story. Yeah, I did the same thing. Well, I think it was a little more justified in my case. Like there was this kid who like snitched on me on the bus, right? I did something wrong. He snitched on me to the bus driver. So I had to show him what's what, And here's the thing: he's a smaller kid, a weaker kid than me, and he's very passive. I knew he probably wouldn't fight me back, but I feel like I had no choice but to go, fight him. So I did, and yeah, I felt terrible afterwards, man, because you know what? He didn't fight back. Like I wish he did, because at the time I wish he fought back, because then it would have been a fight instead of me just like beating him up. And like he really just wanted me to stop. You know, and even thinking back, it's like I almost feel like a little bit of PTSD about it, because I felt so like evil in that moment. Like I was just beating up this kid who wasn't fighting back. He's asking me to
Yeah.
stop, right? And I just kept going. I mean, I didn't hurt him that badly. I was what 8 years 8 years old, so it wasn't like it didn't go crazy. But yeah. Anyway, so that's what happened, and man, just the feeling afterwards was so weird. You know, like
Vitriolic, if you will, right?
yeah, and just towards myself, like it was like my
Self-hatred, like what have I done? Yeah.
yes, and like looking out, and but at the same time, I'm trying to justify it to myself. You know, like I'm like, man, this feels bad, but I had to, right? Like I had to stick up for myself. He snitched on me, right? I had a right to
Yeah.
do that, but it didn't feel good, you know, and I just knew it was wrong. So that was my first encounter with it. Obviously,
Introduction to it, right?
I was 8, so I didn't have the capacity to get any further into it. But as I got older, I definitely did. So now, what happens when people don't consciously define their moral principles? You mentioned it, and I'll just echo what you said. It will lead you down the path that other people want you to follow. So maybe an important reason to read Nietzsche, now that we're here, is Nietzsche does define the concept of will to power. And one thing he makes clear is that if you don't define your own worldview and rise with the power to enforce it, at least in your immediate area, somebody else is going to, right? You're going to be under someone's thumb, and it should be your own. You should make it your own. But if you don't have like if you don't have a perspective, then you're sort of everywhere, you know. And
All at once.
whatever way the wind is blowing, that's where you're going to end up, right? You're going to end up as a post. In fact, that is what a postmodernist is. It's somebody with no perspective, and so that's what you are. If you've never really dug into this question and tried to answer it for yourself, like what do I believe is right or wrong? What is my moral code? If some new situation comes up, how will I address it and determine what's right or wrong about it? If you've never done that for yourself, then you are a postmodernist, and you're going
Right.
every which way. You're going every which direction.
Right.
It will lead you into evil. So I have another question I want to ask that's related to this, and then I have something to say about it, but I'll ask you first.
Yeah.
So if morality is real, and we both agree it is, and if we I assume we both agree it's important, what does it mean to be immoral? What is immorality then?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, from my perspective on here, without invoking divine command, this is a hard question to answer, but it's for me. I view it as if there's something that's morally good. To me, I think that that's something that's good for the well-being of you and good for the well-being of society without hurting the well-being of society, right? So it's almost a utilitarian categorical imperative blend, but it's an easy answer to for it to be evil or to be immoral rather is sorry jumping the gun on that. It's something that's the contrary positive to that, right? So that would be
Okay.
something that is bad for the well-being of the society or bad for the aggregate well-being of you and your community, right? Or something that makes in Kant's words that makes society not functional. So
Yeah.
for me, it's that's a way to define it. But there's also another layer of it is that I don't sit there and think, okay, is this good for society? Is this good for me when I do things, right?
Yeah.
It's more of a gut feeling that I kind of know from the top down and then can later use bottom up explanations to rationalize good behaviors. And I try to double click on them all the time because I want to introspect and think, am I just coping here? Or am I using my logic and reason as an excuse to do this thing I want to do that's actually I know that I can know is bad.
Yeah.
But in these cases, it's kind of a feeling that I know, and it's like when you go to court, there's a certain legalese term kind of with regards to something that's sexual in nature. So when they're talking about something like you can't have anything that's sexual in nature, or whatever have you on maybe in certain aspects of certain societies,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't define that on purpose. They define that strictly as you know it when you see it,
Yeah.
and that's kind of how I view the feeling that comes to me when I do something wrong. But you can't live your life on just that feeling. You have to double click and introspect and go from there, as well as couple
Right.
the feeling. I'm just saying the feeling is a proxy for for me. It maps one to one so far on what actually is wrong, and from a categorical imperative and from a utilitarian perspective as well. Except with exceptions on the utilitarian aspect, because I'm not fully saying that that's 100% map to one, because there's too many things there with the trolley problem that you and I
Yeah.
would disagree with. So that's I'll leave it at that for now, and see if you're satisfied with that. But I'd love you to kind of do an internal critique if you want. I mean, it's your call.
Well, it's funny because I was going to say that we pretty much agree on this, right? And even as a Christian, um, immorality is not always obvious, and well, morality, the converse is true too. It's not always obvious, even though we do believe God is giving us divine command. We still have, the world is very complicated, and not everything is going to be in the Bible, and not everything is going to be something that somebody else has encountered exactly before. So you're going to encounter situations where, the right and the wrong is very gray, and it's very difficult to determine, and it becomes quite neutral. And so that's sort of the gray area of what makes immoral. It's not always obvious. There is a gray area there, but there is also the part where it's much clearer, right? The very clear lines between good and evil. And now my perspective is that the devil, or evil, and I'm just going to say the devil because that's in my equivalent, the devil uses those gray areas to push you further towards the dark ones, right? So an example of this, in my view, is what we were just talking about. If you're going through your life without really ever seriously questioning your own moral compass, that is a sin. You're doing something wrong. That's a bad thing for you, right? And I think Tony would agree with that. It's going to lead you in different directions. In and of itself, it's not like clearly evil. Like I wouldn't call you evil because you've never investigated your own worldview. I would just say you're sort of lacking in a certain respect. But it leads you to evil, right? And I think I demonstrated that before, where if you're a postmodernist with no perspective, you're going to end up telling the little kid who wants to cut their genitals off that they should do it, and you're going to go help them do it, right? That's what you're going to end up doing. So the devil uses these little gray areas to push you towards evil, and so that's why you need to be able to recognize when you've gone that far. As I said, you may end up in a gray area and make the wrong choice, and it will become clear later that you kind of screwed up, right? The key is to recognize that as soon as possible, and then make steps to fix it, to repent in the Christian worldview. So obviously another key aspect of the Christian worldview is that you're always going to make mistakes. You're a human being. You are totally flawed. So you need to have forgiveness for yourself and seek forgiveness from God, who will always forgive you no matter what you've done, and be able to forgive yourself, but then be able to repent and try to make things right. So immorality, to me, in a nutshell, is the inability, or perhaps even a refusal, to acknowledge when you've gone beyond that gray area into the clearly evil zones, right? Mm-hmm. Like I wouldn't call you immoral because you ran the stoplight. Right? I mean, that's an immoral thing to do. I wouldn't call you evil, is what I should say. I wouldn't call you evil because you ran the stoplight. But it's obvious how that could lead to something that is truly evil. Like maybe you ran over a pedestrian because you're an idiot and you didn't look at the stoplight, right? So recognize when you're doing something that's going to push you that far, make the steps to fix it, and a refusal to do that is what makes something really immoral, in my view.
Right. And yeah, I mean, that's perfectly well said, because to me that is a explanation of it using like a spiritual and a religious background to explain it, but it doesn't require it the way you explained it, right? You explained it in a way that doesn't require the spiritual framework of it. But and we could double click on the example you gave, but I don't think it's worth it to do that right now, because that's I could see myself going an hour on why it's not morally wrong for you to run a stop sign, and we alluded to that earlier. That's neither here nor there, because I think that there's a really important thing here is like, okay, why does any of this matter? Like, is morality something that is supposed to be okay? So when I say morality is what you should do, like, do you agree with that in some way?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you ask the question, what should I do? The answer to that is morality, right? Like, okay, based on morality, you should do this. Based on morality, you should not do this. So when people make laws, should they be using morality as a way to make laws? And are they? Does that make sense? For society.
Okay. Sure. Should, yes. We ought to. We ought to use morality as a basis for laws. Do we? I think in principle we do, but right. I think that it's not a one-to-one correlation.
Right.
Many of our laws are simply to help rich people get richer, right? Which, if anything, is immoral. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, in principle, we should do that, and I would say that's again, in principle, that's what the law is like a codification of morality, of the society's morality. But
It's the public narrative is that that's what it is, but as you just
Yeah.
pointed out, there's the people who have the power have corrupted themselves.
Right.
They're now corrupt, and they actually write laws to benefit and benefit themselves with benefit the oligarchs, etc. But the reason I'm asking that is because some people don't even agree that that the law should be a map from morality to prescription of what you should do legally. And there's always this, and this is why I always have to make this distinction, saying, okay, do I agree with it legally, or do I agree with it morally, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I don't care if something's legal or not, right? And I'm not going to give you a disclaimer because I don't care. You can take this as legal advice. You can. Go ahead, take this as legal advice. I don't give a shit. I actually don't care. Take this as legal advice. I don't care if something's legal or illegal, okay? Unless I'm in the context of do I want to get in trouble, right?
Yeah.
Or not.
Yeah.
Because to me, I don't allow, Uncle Sam to tell me what's morally acceptable, right? To me, I don't care about that. I have my own version of it, and that's postmodern. You can say, oh, it's postmodern. You have your own version. No. I have already, in my mind, come up with a moral framework for myself that's better than jaywalking is morally wrong. That's better than monopolies existing is morally wrong. I don't care about any of that stuff. That's legalese.
Right.
That's all stuff for people to. It's a different scope, different conversation. But I'm bringing it into this because I want to point this out. It's really important to me to say, hey, the people that are pretending to be in power when they wear their fake suits and they dress up and they go, the 538 folks that do the votes on how much money we should, is it 400 billion or 105 billion to Ukraine?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's not reflective of anything. That's so disconnected with me at all that I'm not even going to pretend. I'm withdrawing consent from that system, right?
Yeah.
So I know it at one point in 1776, that may commence again, but in 1776, it was that I really do believe that's what it was. It was 1776 said, hey, morality is the law. And we are I think it's an argument can be made that we are a Christian nation. That's kind of what they didn't say, but they implied and said in some ways. Yeah. But everyone always likes to say, well, it's, separation of churches. My point is they had Christian values, whatever. So at the time, I really believe that at that point, that was the starting point. And ever since that day, July 4th, 1776, we've been going so far away from what our map of laws to morality has gone so far away from the origin of it.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
We're really on a path to degeneracy, and I would like you to kind of give your input on that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So I mentioned St. Augustine and the city of God, and I'll be honest with you, I haven't read it. I'm not going to pretend I've read it. I know what it's about, which is why I talked about it. But the idea is that anything made by men is going to degrade over time. By the way, it's hailing here, so I'm sorry if that's in the background.
No, I can't hear it. I can't hear it.
Good. It should be fine. But anyway, anything that's made by men is going to degrade over time because we are imperfect and we will make mistakes. The only true way to eternity is by following God. It's a bit of a black pill what I'm about to say here, but the country is always destined to fall, right? As the United States of America, as much as I love it, will not last forever. It will not last forever. It was created in a moment of genius, and I think that the Constitution is one of the most remarkable legal documents ever created. Like the system of government that these dudes came up with is nearly perfect. But I don't think anything could ever actually be perfect if it's created by men. So they got really, really close, but there's no way they could have predicted all these little ways that we'd find to break it. And if you see that the society that we live in now, with the political system, the way that it works today, I wouldn't say it's unrecognizable. It would be unrecognizable to them, but they would recognize it as a bastardization of what they had come up with, right? We don't really respect the spirit of the Constitution in many respects, right? And I think the key reason is that we have gone further and further away from the foundational principles. This is a Christian nation. Every founder, every person who was involved in the foundation of the country was a Protestant Christian European, right? Maybe there was some atheists.
Caveat of 2% of the top leaders were deists, but that's whatever.
Yes.
Everyone quotes that, but yeah.
Right, but largely, and especially in terms of the population, the vast majority were European Protestant Christians. That is the spirit of this country, like it or not. I'm not even a Protestant, right? So it hurts me to admit this a little bit, but Yes, they came up with this nearly perfect country, and now, if you ask, if the average, like, let's say, liberal had a conversation with the average founder of the country and they talked about like moral issues, the liberal Democrat would like spit on our founders. They would hate their guts if we talked about like gay marriage or, God, try to bring up transgenderism to George Washington.
Gun
Like,
rights,
you would give
freedom
him
of
a stroke,
speech.
right? Yeah, yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. But like, name anything. We're so far, and you know, the conservatives are much closer. I mean, I think the conservatives still idolize the founding fathers to a degree, although I don't think we're, you know, exactly in line with them in many respects. But yes, I mean, I guess I'm just sort of saying in a longer way what you've already said, which is that we've really strayed so far from the original foundation of the country,
Yeah.
and that's why we have so many problems. I mean, and I'll be honest with you, there's no way back. There's no way back.
No, and I think I bring this up because it's like I want to talk about kind of what is morality for, you know, the three, the big three, right? So what is
Yeah.
it? And that's why I brought it up, because I think it's a segue into, okay, so if morality is a way for you to make laws, like what is it to, you know, your money aspect, your fitness aspect? I guess we don't talk about fitness, but what is it about your life? Like, should it be in your? How do you handle morality with your relationships? How do you handle it with your career? And how do you handle it with your friends? Is that different? Like, how do you go out on that angle? And
Yeah.
I think you don't handle it with your government. I think you just at this point withdraw consent. In my mind, and that's MGTOW, and I've said don't do that, but for this
Yeah.
aspect of it, in my mind, anytime anybody that's government official or even masquerading as a public official, even like, yeah, even like somebody like a doctor, a teacher, somebody who is in a fake position of power, never let them tell you what is good or bad.
Right.
Think of your own, figure out that on your own, and disagree with them loudly when they do it to your face, but don't just sit in line and say, I will put the mask on, I will put the chip in my brain, I will do, you know,
Yep.
only chance with 100 guys. Do your own research on spiritual research on what you need to do, and withdraw consent from these fake power, you know, mongering people. So that's kind of
Yeah.
that's why I brought that up, and so that's why I'm so animated about it, is because I don't like when a doctor tells me you have to get the vaccine or else you're hurting your neighbor. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point.
Not
Yeah.
not because it helps the top lines of my company, right? They leave that part out, but
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's a great point. Just the divorce between morality and actual ethics is they've been divorced a long time, right? So you
yeah,
should not rely on the law as your guide, and you need to be able to, like Tony said, recognize where it's just completely wrong. Now, I would never tell you to break the law, but I am going to tell you you should not follow every law just blindly, right? You need to
right,
use your
blindly,
brain.
yeah,
You need to use
yeah,
your brain, and don't rely on these people who are in power because they have alternative motives. So, yeah, key point you made there.
yeah.
So yeah, we
So
want to
that
move into like
perfect, yeah,
relationships
perfect
first.
segue.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. We'll go right into that. So I guess,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll kick over you with this. Yeah, we'll go here. I mean, there's some things that are immoral about, you know, manipulation, etc. Is it immoral to, you know, manipulate or gamify the dating world, right? So talking
Right.
about that aspect of it.
Great. Yeah. So game, right, is like a red pill term when it comes to dating, when it comes to women. Obviously, as always, we're pretty much talking from a man's perspective here. So, you know, women watching, if first of all, God bless you for being like the one woman who's watching this video. But anyway, we're talking about men. So, men dating women, is it morally correct, or is it immoral to game them? What is game? Let's answer that first. What is game?
Yeah.
Actually, let me have you answer that, because maybe you'll
Yeah.
do that.
Game in my mind is manipulating truth, like withholding truth while trying to maximize um, your outcomes with respect to the dating like the paradigm of the relationship. So that would be something like, oh hey, she sent me a text, right, and I'm going to gamify this by not immediately telling her what I feel, but instead maybe agree and amplify. Maybe I'll do some different strategy, and that in that mind, that's, yeah, you can say that's a meta cognition. It's a meta theory of it, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of a short answer. But
Okay. I like it. I think I agree with you. I'll expand it a little bit. There's definitely a big chunk of game that is Shadow Realm. You know, if you've seen our recent clip on the Shadow Realm, you'll know what I'm talking about with that.
Yeah.
So there's a huge chunk of game that is withholding truth and sort of presenting a more rosy picture, if you will. Not necessarily lying, but just sort of spiffing up the truth. But there's also an element of game that is not lying at all. It's just maximizing your own charm, you know.
Right.
So now in either respect, and the reason I think it's good that we framed it this way is I don't think it's immoral either way. I think, in fact, my view, and this is, I'm a Christian saying this, so hopefully I get some credibility for this. I think game is not only morally acceptable, but it's actually a requirement. I think you should be doing it. I think if you're not maximizing your game, you are not maximizing your ability to find a wife, which means you're not maximizing your ability to reproduce and like
2.1.
continue your yeah, have
Yeah.
2.1 children and continue the Earth's population and continue God's glorious creation, which is what you're called to do. It's my view that's your highest calling on Earth, unless you're called to something else, but that's very rare. So I think game is a moral imperative, and it's specifically because just simply saying the truth, just blurting out whatever the truth is not morally correct all the time, right? You need to know when is it the right time to divulge the truth. Now, I'm not telling you to lie. Don't lie, but not telling the truth is not equivalent to lying, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I'll let you expand from here, but I could say
No, and I
more.
like that. I like where
Yeah.
you framed that because to me, it's interesting. You said imperative. I don't think it's an imperative to in the way that the red pillars say, hey, we need to have intercourse with 1,000 women is like literally some of them say I think there's been a guy that says you need to have intercourse with at least 100 women before you get married. I think somebody said that before in the red pill space.
It's
I don't know if
insane.
you ever heard that.
Yeah, that's insane.
But to
I've
me,
never heard
like
that.
that's taking what we just said and Bikram yoga stretching it to way out of there. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Whereas all we're saying is, and I think we both agree, is that you can't go into this with a naive perspective, right? You got to go into this with an understanding of let's use this example. Let's say you had a friend at school and he says, "Hey, we're gonna meet at the flagpole and we're gonna play chess, best 2 out of 3, next Friday, and the winner of that is gonna get a free pizza. You know, you're gonna have to buy me pizza if I beat you, best 2 out of 3, and you've never played chess before, and you say, "Yeah, well, you're game on." Are you going to go into that without studying what a pawn, what a rook, how to castle, all this and that and the other? Or are you going to
Yeah.
go in blind and say, let me just do what I feel is best? I'll move this piece because it looks like it could be, and this one looks bigger. No, you're going to go in and dissect and say, okay, there's game, let me gamify this. And,
Yeah.
and in that context, the answer to the question, is it morally wrong to gamify chess? Hell no, it's not morally wrong. It's
Right.
actually imperative that you do it, right?
Yeah.
So if you map that one-to-one on relationships, and again, not to dehumanize relationships, but I'm going to dehumanize them so that we rehumanize them later.
Yeah.
You need to dehumanize the relationship from the aspect of, is it a game? It is a game in some way, and the game is, hey, I need to, at end game 2.1, how do I get there? Okay, I need to actually figure out how to way to present myself to women because
Right.
there's something in you. You have that dog in you, and she wants that dog. So how do you unleash that dog? Well, it's not by just saying, yeah, you know, I feel like The Notebook was okay, 6 out of 10, but Rotten Tomatoes, no, that's nowhere, right? What really
Yeah,
is figure
yeah.
out the game of dating, right? The art of dating is a thing. It's a science. It's a philosophy. It's a philosophical question. It's everything, right? But
Yes.
yeah, that's where I'm going with that. And don't get sucked into the manosphere and say I need to OnlyFans 100 women. Don't do that. But you know, there is that aspect of yes, it is a game, and no, it's not morally wrong to gamify the situation, right?
Yeah.
So obviously, there's nuance. So
Yeah. So I love what you said, the art of dating. I love that because it's not a science. It is an art. And there are aspects of it that are very logical and like straightforward, which may be a little more scientific, but ultimately it is an art. So another way to say that this is I believe a moral imperative is because when you're dealing with love and relationships, you're not in the realm of the rational, right? There is rational concerns, like, you know, if you want to have kids, you need to find a woman who's capable of having kids. She's young enough to have kids or whatever, and you guys agree on, you know, where you want to live and I don't know, stuff like that. There's rational, practical concerns for sure. But when you're talking about love, it's not a rational question, right? People love you because of how you make them feel, right? It's not a question of logically this person is fulfilling these check boxes, right? We've criticized that before. that doesn't lead to love. It has nothing to do with it. You can come along into a woman's life and she'll have this idea, this checklist in her mind of like, this is what the perfect man will look like. This is who I'm looking to get married to. And you don't fit any of those check boxes, but you make her feel a certain way and you're in, right? Period, end of story. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Now, as you said, we can yoga stretch it and make it very evil very quickly, right? Because you can do that. Like, let's say you have no intention of marrying this girl, and you just want to get her in bed, and so you're putting on a mask to do that. Of course, obviously that's evil, right? But those are two separate actions. You're using a tool that God gave you, which is your reason and your humor and your charm, and you're using that for evil. That's on you, right? You can use any tool for any purpose, and to me, game is a tool. So. Yeah, you have to treat it like an art. Understand that you're trying to trigger certain emotions. You're trying to trigger certain feelings. It's not a logical question. And really that's one of the principles of game I just gave it to you. Like if a woman's asking you questions, this is not an interview. I go on a date, it's not a freaking interview, right? We're having a good time. Like if you're going to sit there on a date and just ask her a series of questions, like you're reading off a piece of paper, you're never going to see her again, right?
Love that.
It needs to be fun. Right? It's not rational. It's not logical. It's not like a step-by-step thing. So
love that you said that because I do want to, as I always do, and again, sorry for interrupting you here,
no,
but
you're good.
I always interface dating with interviews. It's actually funny you bring that up because I always think, okay, hang on a minute. Just like you said, dating is not an interview, but an interview is not an interview. If you apply that, think about it like that. So if you're in an interview, think of it as a date, kind of, in a weird way, right?
Absolutely.
Don't think of it inappropriately as a date if it's a female interviewer, but think of it as a date where you're saying, "Hang on a minute, how do I pass this shit test?" Yeah. They ask you let's say you're let's say it's software engineering, and they ask you something like, they look at your resume and they see something that you wrote on your resume and they say, "Well, are you technically, because what you wrote here, is it technically a framework, or can you explain that a little better?" That guy here, right there, he's doing the same thing that maybe a woman would ask you on a date, where they say, well, so they'll give you a shit test, and you just look back and you handle it the same way. You say, frameworks or whatever, frameworks are frameworks and this, that, and the other. But hey, let me ask you this. Let me pressure flip it on you and say, hey, what would day 4, day 5 look like when I'm at your company? And how would I involve myself in the upper high stacks, low stacks, etc. For day 5, day 6, and then how long would it take me to get kind of fully on board to where I actually add value to the company? Flipping it so you took the question and flipped it way out of scope for what he was talking about, but you're already in their frame, so no longer in their frame, they're in your frame now. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it's interesting.
That's funny that you said that. An interview is also not an interview. 100% right? Like, and I'll keep zooming out.
Yeah.
Nothing is what it seems, right? There's no human interaction that's just
everything is nothing.
Yeah. There is no human interaction that's just like perfectly straightforward like that, and you shouldn't treat them like that. Like you should treat every human interaction as as an opportunity to like have fun, right? That's like a key element of not just game, but like even interpersonal relationships. Right? And again, hopefully that's clear why that's morally good. It should be clear that that's morally good for me to go to every interaction trying to have a good time, right? And because there's many, many ways to have a good time. Like, be funny, to have jokes, that's one way, right? But there's maybe like a nice, deep intellectual talk, like Tony and I are having right now. I'm having a great time. Like, but we're not like having a comedy hour, but I'm still having a great time. And maybe you're just doing activities together. Like, that's another fun way to, and you're not even really talking that much, but you're just doing stuff together. See, there's many, many ways to like have a good time and to enjoy your presence and to enjoy someone else's presence. And it is morally good. Right? That's really what this is all about, man. Like, that's what this life is all about, is to be around other people, to form strong relationships and enjoy those bonds, right? So I think that really cuts to why this is morally good. And I'm glad you brought it there, because I wasn't thinking of that originally, but it's funny.
It is interesting when you said that dating is not an interview, because I immediately started thinking, well, hang on a minute. And then you get into the family and friends aspect of it, and it's like, do you treat your family different? Yes, you do, right? And is that something that is morally acceptable? Yeah, I think it is. I can kind of rationalize it with emotions and feelings and this and that and the other, but why is it morally better? Why is it morally okay to, I'm assuming you agree with this, but maybe you don't. Why is it morally okay to treat your brother better than you treat your neighbor, and then treat your neighbor better than you treat somebody in Qatar,
Yeah,
for example?
great question. So, yeah, and I do agree with you. We should treat our family member. I think that there is a tier list that's pretty strict in the Christian worldview. Right, it starts with God, number one, and then yourself, and then your neighbor. We're talking about God as the highest ethic, right? You follow Him first, and then you must take care of yourself second, right? And then you must take care of your immediate family member, and then your neighborhood, and then your country, and then the whole world, right? And it goes in a pretty strict hierarchy like that. Why now? Obviously, in that order, you need to be treating your brother better than you're treating your neighbor. And I think the simple fact is you grow up with that person. Like that person is stuck in your life forever, right? You guys share blood. You guys share. Nobody except your closest family members understands you as deeply as they do, right? Like even your closest friends, like Tony and I, we're very close friends. I've known each other a long time. I don't know him as well as his brothers do. They grew up together. They were kids together. They slept in the same room together, right? Like that's like a level of bonding that you can't recreate. So I think it's very important to maintain those bonds because, again, in my view, the most important thing in this world is your human relationships, right?
Right.
And that's one of the most fundamental ones that you have. So yes, you should treat your family differently. You should give them patience, and they're going to require a lot of patience because when you have that deep of a relationship, that kind of bond where you guys have known each other your entire lives, you know everything about each other, including a bunch of stuff that you are sick of. Like you're sick of these certain traits that they have, and they're never going to change. You've been complaining about it for 20 years, and it's not going to change. You have to make peace with that eventually, and that's hard to do. And it's not something you have to do when it comes to like friends. Like with friends, somebody gets on your nerves enough as a friend, that's it, right? You guys aren't friends anymore, right? But that person's never not going to be your family member, right? So it requires a different perspective.
No, and the reason I asked this, and I'm glad you agree with it, but it's more like yeah, we say that, and somebody could take that out of context and say, oh well, Dean is giving me justification to bomb Gaza because they're not my neighbor. No, idiot. Listen, think about it like this. What we're saying is immediately focus on the fires that need to be put out right now, right? Like, does your brother have an issue right now, like with alcoholism, that you need to intervene and help him out with? Does your neighbor later on that week have a situation where his fence is messed up and you feel like it's a little bit at your fault, so you want to go fix that? Does the guy over in Alabama that you may know from high school say, hey, I might need to borrow $100, but I'll pay you back, and then he offers you to pay you interest, and you say no, that's usury, so I'll just give you the $100. Give it to me when you're ready. Yeah, that's all good and well. Does the guy in Qatar say, hey, I want to, I want you to stop bombing me, so what do we do? That's a different question. But yeah, see where I'm going with this? Like that. It doesn't mean you're going to be mean to your neighbor, right? It just means you have to focus on you have 100 units of resources to help people, right? Focus the first 50 of them on your immediate family, right? Or in your case, God, and then immediately your family, and say, hey, what do I have left over to dispense with? Hey, I can help my neighbor now. Then I can help the guy over in Alabama. Then the last 10, maybe I can donate to this cause in Qatar, right? Yeah. So, and then maybe eventually Mars, right? See what I'm saying? Like, do you agree with that? I guess with that little breakdown.
Yeah. You have to go that way because you cannot. No matter how many resources you acquire or how great you think you are at like solving problems, you will never solve the world's problems. It is impossible. No individual is going to do that. No group of people is going to do that, right? It's not going to happen. The world will always have problems. So if you're starting from this perspective of let's solve the world's problems, you're immediately guaranteeing failure in all of your endeavors. You're going to waste all of your resources and time doing that. The reverse is not true. If I start in the deeply personal and then in my immediate surroundings, I can succeed. I can like fix my life to at least to a standard that I'm happy with. I can do that. And then I can use the remaining time that I have to boost up the people around me, right? My friends and my family, I can boost them up and help them fix their lives. And if they're doing the same thing, we're all going, you see, that's a way to succeed. That's possible to succeed doing that. So yeah, that's how I would phrase that. But yes, I completely agree with what you said there. Mm-hmm.
That's good. I think there is a hierarchy there for sure. And I think that definitely relates to what we said in 10 and 11, the
Yeah.
hierarchies and stuff. It's a common thing. We talk about that a lot with
Yeah.
hierarchies, and I think it's a good way to view things.
Yeah.
It's a
You
very
must.
masculine thing to do, I think, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
I think that's, and one more thing I have on this, and this is kind of what I was talking to you about like last week. What do you do when somebody says, "Hey, what you're doing is morally wrong," right? And
Yeah.
let's say you disagree with that. You say, "Well, I think it's morally right," And we'll give examples, but I think just generally speaking, what should you do in that case? Like, right? Like, what's going
Yeah.
on with that?
That's a great question. So, for me, for you too, for everybody, it's going to depend on what the question is. Let's, for the sake of discussion, let's assume that it's something that is like gray. Like if somebody's like, "Hey, you should be murdering people. Why aren't you doing that?" You don't need to examine that. That's just crazy, right?
Yeah, yeah,
If somebody gives you like, "Hey, maybe you shouldn't run the stoplight," maybe that's a little grayer, and that is something you could look at. So
okay,
I would say
maybe.
that, assuming that it's something that's not just totally ridiculous right off the bat, then the first thing you have to do is become self-critical. You need to be able to internalize the criticism, whether or not you agree with it on the face. You must be able to seriously think about it. Like, this person said something to me that, and here's the thing: when somebody criticizes you in like a moral way, you're gonna immediately push back. Immediately, you're gonna. It's just an instinct you're gonna have to be like, shut up. Like, I don't want to hear that. Like, you're a dweeb, or you're some on your high horse or something like that. You're immediately going to push back against it in your mind. So I'd say the number one thing to do is overcome that. Just listen to them. It doesn't mean you have to agree. It doesn't mean you have to change anything. Just listen to what they're saying, and then just hear it and sit with it and be like, okay, here comes the criticism. Let me think. Is there something to that? And I'd say that's the most difficult part of it, is that. And it can be painful, and it can require maybe a lot of time and a lot of thought. In my case, a lot of prayer to really think about this question: is it really right, or is it really wrong? But that's the only way you're going to come to a conclusion. So I mean, after that, once you've internalized it, I don't really think I can give you a prescription anymore, because that's going to come down to you and your own process of like really vetting the idea. But
Right.
that's how I would respond to it. What about you?
No, that's good. Definitely, I agree with you. Introspect, self-examine, and get into it and get into the weeds, but address it with the severity of the claim, like you said. But
Mm-hmm.
I think if it's something such as, like, we can use this one as an example. Let's say you're 20 years old, 21 years old, whatever, and one of us, let's say Dean or I, says, "Hey, we think you shouldn't be engaging in sexual degeneracy. Like, what should you do?" Right?
Yeah.
Like, the instinct that you have there is to say, "Well, it makes me feel good, and I think I should do it," and you don't have a good reason for that other than whatever you said. I don't agree with it. That's one way to frame it. But really ask, why are they saying that, and why? What could that be the case, right?
Yeah.
So if engage with it, and if they don't give you a good reason, I mean, that's a flaw on their end, and I get that, but do you have a reason to be engaging in that level of degeneracy, right? So that's
Yeah.
why we disagree with the red pill, right? It's like, we don't think you should be engaging in sexual degeneracy, and they want you to. 100 guys,
Right.
100 girls rather. Yeah. So it's like, what do we do about that, right? That's the thing, that somebody wants to do something so much, like it's their biological urges, they want to succumb to that, and we're just saying, "Hey, don't do that." It's not
Right.
that simple, right?
Right.
It's like, I don't know. There's more to it than that.
Yeah, and that's a great example of that's a difficult argument to make from the perspective of, like, if I'm saying to somebody, you should not engage in sexual degeneracy, right? If they believe in God, it's easy. But if they don't, right? Assuming I'm talking to somebody who's like an atheist or whatever, it's very, very difficult for me to really strongly make the argument that they shouldn't do that, right? So I'm sort of
Right.
just relying on them to introspect. That's all I can. That's all I can do, is like plant a seed and hope that they're going to introspect. And frankly, I really believe that it's really just going to be time that's going to show them that it's just not worth it, right? I mean, that sort of played out a little bit in my own life. Like, I've only been Christian in for like a few years now. So before that, I did engage in that kind of thing, and I had to find out that was not really helpful or beneficial, and it kind of just made me feel worse, ultimately. And I just had to find that out. I mean, no, yeah, people were saying that, but I didn't really give a shit about that. Why do I listen to what you have to say, right? Like, I didn't have the humility to like listen to what they're saying and then play it out in my head, or maybe just talk to people who've gone through it and then like internalize what they're saying. I didn't have that humility. So I mean, humility is a very important moral ethic, I guess I should say. So it's a very important ethic, and I think it's for that reason. You have to be able to listen to criticism, no matter how extreme it is, and humor it. Give it a chance. Maybe it is correct. Maybe even though it is something that like really grinds your gears when you hear it, that really like feels dumb, and you don't want to listen to it. Maybe that's like a really important reason to listen to it. At least just think about it. It doesn't mean you have to agree, but just think about it.
No, and that's where I say like it's perfect for, I guess, the balance of power in so far as you and me, the atheist and the orthodox. It's I can talk to somebody at that age and say, hey, from my perspective, let's say as from a materialist perspective, I can tell you like why you shouldn't be doing that, right?
Yep.
And you know that argument, so you can say that if you're just going to match their energy because it's important to you that they know that they don't engage in something that in your mind is morally wrong. So you're going to actually do whatever strategy you can. You're not going to have to say, like you just like you said, you're not going to necessarily invoke divine command if they are not somebody who subscribes to that. So you are engaged, armed and dangerous, if you will, with the tools to equip. You're equipped with those tools to go the other route with it because it leads to the same result, right? You could say, hey, game theory suggests that if you do this, if you keep doing this type of behavior, like you're not going to, have the best outcomes. And here's why, right? You can go down that route, and it's like that's why you have that kind of Johnny Sins range. You know what I mean? And
yeah, I don't know who that is, but yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so and you have that range, so it's like I think it's important to have that range and that variety of tools to say, okay, this person is a Catholic. Let me argue. Let me try to convince this Catholic that he shouldn't be doing this thing, right? And it's gonna be hard because he's gonna say, well, I'm saying that the Bible says this, that, and the other. Why would I listen to you? You're just some random person. But it could be one of those cases where the Bible didn't explicitly say, what to do about it, and you're left to your own judgment, like the sink urinal distinction, right? Yeah. And then you go down and say, hey, like, okay, what about this and that and the other, right? So it's kind of like you got to be equipped with those tools to kind of go about that route. So yeah, I don't know. It's
that comes with what we were talking about earlier, with like making sure that you have a moral principle that you're grounded in, right? That everybody needs to. I think that that's a very important part of being a man. You need to know what you believe and why you believe it. Right? If nothing else, whether or not you agree with me as a Christian, I have zero respect for you if you have like no real worldview. That's that's boyish, right? If I think of people in my life who I look as like being boyish, right, regardless of what age they are, they all have that in common. Like if I started to ask them like deep moral questions, they wouldn't know the answer. Like they've never thought about it, right? It's childish, really, is what it is. So if you're going to be a man in this world, you need to have a perspective. You need to plant your flag somewhere, right? Otherwise, you're not a man. You're you're something else. You're a boy.
Yeah. No, and I like that. And I guess it segues me into this. When should you be telling people what they should or shouldn't do?
No, that's a good one. Yeah.
That's meta, right? That's a meta question. Like, when should you and when shouldn't you be telling people when they should or shouldn't do things?
Well, I think that there is a time for it. It's not all the time. I mean, a lot of times you need to hold your tongue, frankly. I think a lot of times you need to let people make their own mistakes, because that is an important part of learning. But, it's obviously... Well, no, it's going to extend into, like, if they want to pass laws based on their mistakes they're making, you need to speak up, right? So it's like, it's a matter of, like, how much is it going to infringe upon you? How much is it going to infringe upon them? And then how much do you really care about them, right? Because maybe it's like, I see that you're going to really hurt yourself, but I don't care about you that much because you're kind of a stranger, so I'm still going to hold my tongue, something like that.
Well, I was going to say, people don't respond well to unsolicited advice. They tend to kind of reject it immediately, and that's a whole other thing. But I actually would like to bring something up that that's kind of related to this, and it's one of our subscribers said, Melee Rules. He brought up that this term addictive personality and how it's kind of a way that people use to excuse their bad behavior. And he actually introspected and said, hey, I actually do. I'm a victim. I'm guilty of this myself. He said, "Hey, addictive personality. Like that's just my thing, and that I use to rationalize my addictive behaviors, right?" And I think, and I actually spoke to him off like out of context there about that, and we had a little bit of a conversation about that. And I want to bring that into this. It's that the left will use terms like that, like, hey, addictive personality or any of the isms, right? And they'll remove agency from themselves, or ownership rather from themselves, and offset that to one of the isms, or the addictive personality thing, or what have you, and that way they can feel like they didn't. It's not their fault, which feels better in the moment, but then in my mind does not lead to positive outcomes. And the reason I say the left does that is because I want to say the right does that too in some ways, and I'll give you an example. The right will say, a lot of right wingers will say this. Will say, hey, the reason I'm not doing well right now in society is because of immigration, or is because of Israel, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of that could be, maybe true or whatever, but does that mindset ever help you?
No, it doesn't.
So
Yeah.
so where I'm going, so what I'm saying is, like, what I want to double click on is taking ownership for things is very important. And anytime you allow yourself to go down that route of ism, like, when I say ism, I mean, like, oh, it's, I failed because of racism, I failed because of transphobism, I failed because of Islamism, or whatever.
Yeah.
I failed because of addictive personality. You're not allowing yourself a gateway to introspect and say, well, let's suppose that it was 100% my fault, and what can I do better for the next opportunity, right? Same way with immigration, same way with Israel, all that stuff. It's like, maybe it's true that there's some degree that person is racist and that's why you didn't get the job, but if you just assume the opposite, you're not going to ever be hurt, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you assume the truth, let's say it is true. If you assume that, could hurt you, because then you could force yourself to not introspect. See where I'm going with this?
Yeah. And I think what you're advocating for, like, an extreme humility, right, or extreme ownership.
Extreme ownership,
Yeah. And I fully agree with you. And yeah, I mean, the conservatives are just as guilty of this, right? I mean, Facebook,
in different ways.
Or X are just like cesspools sometimes. Like, you see certain conservative opinions, and it's like, it's exactly the same thing that you see on the left. Like, they want to be victims. People want to feel like they're victims. And I think I've said this before. Everybody thinks that they're the Rebel Alliance in Star Wars, right? Nobody thinks that they're the Empire, but somebody is the Empire. And like, everybody can't be a freaking victim, and you shouldn't see yourself like that. It's not healthy. It's not healthy to want to be a victim. So, refuse to be a victim. That's what I try to do in my life, right? Like, unfair stuff happens. I mean, the world is not fair. You're going to be tread upon sometimes. I mean, you're not Elon Musk. You're not Donald Trump. You don't have all this power to do anything you want to do. Somebody's going to get their way over you sooner or later at some point in your life. And you can choose to sit there and have pity for yourself and feel like a victim. But in my view, that's immoral. It's immoral what you're doing, because you're like giving up. It's like you're just failing to reckon with the reality that the world is not fair. Like, that's something that you should already know. It's just, things are unfair sometimes. That's just something you got to deal with, man. But you complain about it as it happens, sure. Bitch about it. Do whatever you got to do. But you need to move on, and you need to not see yourself as a victim. Otherwise, that is immoral behavior in my view. It's a weakness.
Yeah. No, I like that. And the reason I bring that up is because it's in the vein of what should you do, right? And this is something you shouldn't do. You shouldn't adopt mindsets that, okay, it's one thing to recognize that, maybe I'm going to say this as somebody, okay, racism is real. Let's say that, okay? Let's suppose that. It's one thing to recognize that that's real, right? And it's one thing to recognize, okay, yeah, there's certain people that are racist, and, like, you can't change their view, and that's whatever. But you don't, and then again, the same thing with, like, immigration. Immigration is bad right now. It's in a very bad spot, right? Illegal immigration is causing a lot of problems. But can I admit that that's true, but also say, hey, that's not I don't benefit from saying, hey, I can't get this job because it's there's too much competition because of illegal immigration, right? Yeah, that may be true, but or not, but it doesn't really affect that dog in you that needs to be in you, that so you can get a better job and get successful in life. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And I think a lot of people are just unsuccessful, and they need something to blame for that, because the world doesn't make sense if they blame themselves for everything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's more painful to blame yourself too, right? Like, it's easy and it feels good to blame other people, which is why everybody wants to do it. And if you're introspecting, you're constantly zeroing in on your own weaknesses and your own flaws. That's not too fun. I mean, it can lead to depression. Maybe it's a bit of an info hazard to be doing that all the time, but I don't know. I think it's part of being a man. I think a lot of this is instinctual. So we're probably not saying anything that people haven't already thought about, but I do think it gets suppressed, right? Like this idea of like, as a man, I need to just sort of deal with my own problems, and I don't want to appear weak. That is a good thing. You should feel that way, right? That's correct. It gets
Yep.
suppressed by like societies, like you should talk about your problems. You know, everybody, you go to a therapist, you take your SSRIs. If you feel sad, then it's because you have an imbalance. You know, like this kind
Yeah.
of thing is degrading the masculinity of our society, which is a big problem that we have. So I guess I would just say, keep touch with that part of yourself. It is part of who you are. It is a manly way that you have to live. Being a man sometimes is a matter of solitude. It's a matter of like just enduring the harshness, you know, like nobody really can come save you from it. Maybe nobody's supposed to save you from it. That's what makes you tougher. That's what makes you harder. You know, like David Goggins, right? You know, surround yourself with men who are hard and be with those men every day, you know, and
Right.
be a hard man. That's what you gotta do. You
Reject
know?
modernity and embrace masculinity in the sense
Yeah.
that when Gus Fring says it pretty well, a man provides, you know, even when he's not loved. So
Yes.
it's something where I think again, there are people again making excuses for things, and I get that, but and it feels good. But think about this situation, and I'm triple clicking on this on purpose because this is in my mind one of the most important things of what should you do.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and we'll wrap it up here in a minute with and tie back into morality and broader scheme of things. But if you have two scenarios, and one is two people get fired from the same company, the same job, and one person says, "Hey, my boss was racist, so they fired me," and the other person says, "Hey, I had an attendance issue, so I got fired." Who is more likely to get a better job quicker?
The guy who took ownership.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
set that up with an obvious one to make it
Yeah.
simple. But
Yeah.
if you just say, "Hey, I'm dismissing this because my boss is racist," you're never going to think, "Well, what if he wasn't racist and I just actually was late too many times in a row, and I need to work on something like maybe I need to fix my car. It could be something simple, fix
Yeah.
my alarm clock, whatever, or
Yeah.
fix my get after it in a way where I need to start going to bed earlier." It's like that's a very very simplified example, and people are going to say, "Well, it's oversimplified." I did that on purpose because it's a thought experiment, so get after it. But
Yeah.
that's where I'm saying if we go back to our original content where we're talking about locking in a lot, and I think it's time to re-lock in, guys, because we are 3 months in, we're almost 4 months into the
That's
into the
right,
year here,
man.
and like it's
Yeah.
almost a quarter. It's almost a quarter over. And those of you who are saying like, "Dude, you're not even going to recognize me by June," I still recognize you, and we're halfway there. So it's
You're
like,
still pretty recognizable as of
yeah,
right
so
now.
it's like,
Yeah.
and yeah, so we need to, guys, we really need to lock back in. I think that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And yeah, again, with the frame of morality, it sounds kind of like we're talking about something abstract here, but it applies to everyday things like, should I be eating a freak meals? You know, yeah, you
Yeah.
should be, right?
Yeah.
It's morally good for many reasons, right? It's not gluttonous. I mean, you're talking about maximizing the amount of nutrition you need with a minimal amount of like money and effort and time. Get
Right.
involved into it, dude. Freak out with that stuff. It's freak mode month, okay? Get
That's right,
involved.
man. That's right. I'm pumped up from that little speech just now, man. I'm ready to run through this wall, man. Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
So I guess closing it out here, and I do think that was a moral question, as you said. I mean, it's all morality. Of course, is a very abstract, very big subject, but hopefully we related it close enough to home. I mean, I think we took it from the big picture and we sort of zoomed in. I think I like the structure of it, and I hope this was a edifying conversation to anybody who stuck around this long. Now, there's a few closing thoughts, like quick questions, lightning round, we could say here. Is morality an obligation or a choice? I think we both would firmly agree it is an obligation.
Yeah.
I mean, do you?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. If
Yeah.
you say it's a choice, then you're in that realm of postmodernism, neo-Marxist, liberal kind of Kermit the Frog type situation.
Kermit the Frog. Yeah, yeah. You're in bed with the devil. I mean, that's what you're doing. If you think it's a choice, then the choice has already been made inside of you, and evil has won. That's what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Get out of that
Yeah.
mindset right now. Does moral reflection improve on your life and relationships? Without a doubt, right? Like, take the framework of this conversation, apply it to your life, and you don't need to read these. You don't need to read philosophy, and you don't need to become a Christian. Actually, I'll take that back. You do need to become a Christian, but before you get there, at least take the time to introspect on your own life and apply these types of principles and really just think about it, right? If you just think about it a little bit, that's kind of the number one step, right? Anything you want to say about that one?
I think we touched a lot about it, and I agree with you. I think it's very, if you start introspecting with your morality, like, yeah, your immediate relationships you'll see an improvement with them. So,
Yes, absolutely.
yeah. Especially as someone, and I will double click on that. As someone who's married, like, a lot of the times I think about the relationship as a holistic thing, as because we are one flesh, and as an atheist, I do believe we are one flesh still. Even though I know it kind of sounds weird, but
Yeah,
we'll get
that's
into
for
that.
next week's episode. Yeah.
Uh, what I do affects her. What she does affects me, and we're kind of one system. And it's like you kind of think about it from a moral perspective too. Like everything kind of changes, right? So it's interesting, and that's a deep dive in and of itself. But yeah, it definitely
Yeah.
affects in a good way in my mind because you get dividends of on the other end of it. So
Yeah. Great. Well said. All right. And then the last one we got here, and it's not really a question, so I'll just say it's very important that there's like a continuous process here, right? Now, as I said, Christianity is the answer, Jesus is the truth, and that is really the final answer. And that's kind of one of the reasons that, just personally, why I subscribe to Christianity, if you will, is I believe it explains everything that there is to explain. And in fact, it goes further than that. I don't think it's possible to explain anything without it. So it's like both ends of the spectrum. I think it explains everything, but it also is the foundation for making explanations possible. So it's fully intellectually fulfilling in that respect, and it is the end game. It is the end game in my view. Now, obviously, I know you have a completely different view on that, but I just want to make that point that, like, I guess regardless of where you end up, I know I've said my piece on that, but regardless of where you end up, it is a process of improvement. You're not going to be perfect. You're never going to be perfect. Make sure you're able to introspect, to constantly examine yourself and make improvements to your life little by little, and give yourself grace when you fall.
yeah,
You come up with these new rules or new ways you want to live your life, you're going to screw it up right away. Get back on the horse. If you fall 7 times, you get up 8 times, right? No matter what happens, it's never too late. Keep trying, stay locked in, and you're going to get to where you want to be. But anything you want
no,
to close out with?
love that. No, I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that. I think it's iterate, iterate, and iterate. That's what I would say. So
Yes,
that's kind of where I'm with
absolutely,
that.
man.
So
All
thank you
right.
guys so much for checking out the conversation. Like the video, comment on the video, subscribe to the channel. I want to hear all the debates. I want to hear all the negative comments because we want to kind of get after that in a
Yeah.
negative way. I want to kind of rebut that, but also positive comments. Throw some love in the comments. But yeah, thank you guys so much for checking it out, and we'll see you guys next week for another
Thanks,
episode.
guys. All right.